Welcome to Confessions of a Parent Coach. I'm Coach, mother of four, and potty talker, Ann Kaplan. This is the podcast where I confess something from my own parenting and coaching life, teach a lesson around it, and answer your questions. Even we parenting experts are far from perfect, and the real magic happens when we get down with all that imperfection. We get into the gritty side of parenting here, so earbud up and dive in. Welcome into another episode of the podcast, listeners. I am so excited to be here with you today and talking about something that is, I was about to say if you're a woman, but I think that it's true for everybody. And the more that I've done this work, the more I've realized how universal this experience is. But, our relationship with our bodies and beauty and imagery and all of those things that get swirled around and this sort of tornado of influence that we experience when we're younger and go into cultivating a huge aspect of one of the most important relationships we'll ever have in our lives, which is our relationship with ourself. So today what we're going to be talking about is kids and their bodies. And that I know is a very charged subject. It's also a subject that I could do an entire podcast series on, not just one episode. I could start another podcast that's only devoted to body image and kids and their bodies. And I would never run out of stuff to talk about. But we're going to try to just talk about at least sort of the high level concepts that I have brought to bear in my parenting and that I am teaching my clients to bring to bear in their parenting around kids and their bodies and their relationship with their bodies and their relationship with food and all of that really intense charged stuff. And it's a big deal. Some of the biggest questions I get from parents early on when their kids are young is, about food. How do I get my kid to eat? How do I get to my kid to eat healthy? How do I get my kid not to sneak snacks? And, we have this idea of what healthy eating looks like. I think our ideas about parenthood are wrapped up in feeding our kids. There's so much that goes into that. And we're going to try to talk about not necessarily all of it. I'm not going to make a promise I can't keep, but we're at least going to talk about the concepts that do apply to all of it. So even if I don't answer your specific question in today's podcast, the concepts that I'm going to be talking about today, I promise you, if you look at your question through that lens, you will find an answer. And also, by the way, don't forget, you can just talk to me. Remember, never, ever, ever forget, not that I would ever let you forget, that you always have the option to set up a discovery call with me. It is a free chance for us to feel each other out, for me to hear from you and understand exactly what you're looking for and what you're up against in your parenting and give you my honest feedback and for us to feel like, maybe if we want to work together or not. And it's totally fine if we don't. It's a zero pressure, zero stakes, zero cost opportunity for you to get my eyes on your situation. So it blows my mind if you're listening to this podcast and you haven't already set it up right now. What are you waiting for? And anyway, let's dive into this concept. And always, 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 we always have to start our episode off with a confession from me, because that's the name of the freaking podcast, everybody. Confessions of a Parent Coach. So my confession for you this week is I actually wrote a blog post that went out as an email also. So if you're on my email list, you already received it a while ago. And I talked a little tiny bit about my daughter in that blog post and talking about how she has navigated all of these really hard challenges around women and bodies and beauty and food and all that stuff just so beautifully and seamlessly. And my confession for you is not something I feel shameful around at all, but it's a transparency confession, which is she's going through another one of those hurdles right now. And it's her private journey. It's not for me to share all those details until and if someday she gives me permission to share those. So I won't. But to just know that this is a never ending process, that she, and just like all of us, we often think we've, cleared something, and then all we're really doing is getting closer to the next thing that's waiting for us. And I think that's true both for my daughter, who's going through this moment of her life, and for me as her mom, who thought
or was enjoying anyway that sort of stasis of being through her most recent chapter. Well, as a mom, I have to buckle up and put my momming hat back on. And here we go through the next wave of challenges around this topic. So I think it's important. This is one of the reasons why this podcast is called Confessions of a Parent Coach, is because I think it's very important for us to know that going through challenges is not the barometer that we know whether we're doing a good job or not a good job as parents, or whether we're good parents or bad parents, so to speak. It's not because I am failing as her mother that she now is experiencing this next chapter in her evolution of her relationship with her body, and that right now she's struggling to make great choices and stuff like that. This is just her journey. And so I think the most helpful thing we can do to spread that message to parents everywhere is to be transparent. I am a parenting expert. I feel very comfortable calling myself that. And I think anyone who's worked with me probably also would agree with that. I know my stuff. I know I've got the chops, and I'm an amazing coach. I've got my chops in that department too. And I'm an amazing mom. And I feel really confident in saying all three of those things. And that confidence does not waver because my kiddo is struggling right now. And it is possible, not only is it possible, it is guaranteed fact that anybody who is those three things that I just said will also have kids who are struggling, who are misbehaving, who are making bad choices, who are hurting themselves in different ways with all of their mistakes and things like that. Those two things aren't mutually exclusive. In fact, what I would say is that they go hand in hand. And so that's my confession for you today, is that I'm a human with it raising a human child. And right now our humanness is really centering around this topic that we're talking about today, which is kids and their bodies. So let's dive into that. So when I sent out this blog post, and I'm going to reiterate it here, when I had to sit down and write that, I really had to think about, like, well, why have we been able to get through all the things that we've gotten through, and why so far does it seem that my kids have, better dynamics and relationships with their bodies than I do, continue to, will always have. Why? And I kind of tried to boil it down to, a couple of really key things. And the two things are maybe things that don't even seem like they have anything to do with bodies and food and, autonomy and choice and consent and all of that stuff. But the two things are, number one, to be all in on my unfinished business, basically to do my work. And the second thing is to educate myself and level up in my parenting skills. Those two things are, I think, applicable to all areas where I've been, whatever you might consider. If I've been successful in any areas of my parenting, those are the two reasons why. Because I'm doing my work, and because I'm educating myself and leveling up my skill set. So let's talk about those two things, and I'm going to apply them to a couple of specific points in this topic of kids and bodies. So hopefully, if you do have questions or specific topics in mind, you're going to hear me touch on them in some way, shape, or form while we go through this. So to start, let's just talk about food. And I'm going to actually back up a little bit into this world, which I talked about actually a few weeks ago when I talked about intuitive parenting. I talked about this concept of intuitive eating. And if you haven't listened to that episode, it might actually be a great episode to listen to, kind of as a segue, little dovetail with this one. Not necessarily that you need to listen to it before you listen to this, but I think they would go really well together. But, you know, in terms of food and bodies, one thing that was revolutionary for me, and you would maybe wish that it hadn't been so revolutionary for me, but it was, based on my own history with my experience with bodies and beauty and food and things like that, was this idea of the mind body connection, and that a child's relationship with their body and relationship therefore with food is really fully intact and whole and healed and I don't want to say healed because it was never wounded, when they come earthside. Like, so we start with a system that's functional and not, distorted yet, when our kids come into the world. So one of the philosophies that I really bring forward in looking at this topic, especially, is, well, how can we just not distort it or minimize how much distortion we bring forward in our parenting and in our child's childhood, that the childhood we're creating for our kids. And so that philosophy, you're going to see that kind of thread throughout this whole thing. But I really want to always bring it back to those two things: doing our own work and learning skills. So for me, learning about that whole mind body connection, that falls into that skill department. That's information that I didn't fully understand before. And learning that information brought up some of my work, because as soon as I started hearing and looking into this stuff and learning about intuitive eating, for example, all of my stuff about not having a undistorted relationship with my body and with food started coming up. And it's like, well, why am I not feeling this way? Like, why can't I eat intuitively? Why don't I feel okay when I'm hungry and I just eat? Or why do I feel bad if I eat cheesecake, for example? Or, you know, why do I use the scale and the clock to tell me if I'm hungry instead of my actual feeling of hunger to tell me when I'm hungry? And I realized that in order to actually execute on the stuff that I was learning, and therefore create this healthier childhood for my kids, I needed to resolve a lot of that stuff, because otherwise, and I've seen this happen many times, I'll tell you a story about this in a minute. If I really am not actually doing that healing work, I really am going to have a hard time leaning into, like, my child knows if they're hungry. My child knows if they're full. My child knows if this food is good for their body. My child knows if it's not what their body needs right now. That's a really hard thing to believe about your child if you don't already believe it about yourself. And so when your child says, I'm full after eating 2 bites of dinner, or when your child says, I hate, broccoli, when, they ate it last week, it's really hard to believe them, because you have in your mind, like, this is how much food you need to eat. Broccoli is good for you. You just ate it last week. These are all things that we are using to basically have an argument against what our child is telling us. And it's really normal to have that argument against what our child's telling us if we're also arguing with what our own bodies are telling us all of the time. So this is, you see where that dovetailing of doing our own work so that we can learn and then actually use these skills, they really go hand in hand. You can't have one without the other. So the story I was going to tell you is a long time ago, when I very first started my coaching practice, so like it's back in like 2017, I think. I hosted this event for moms. It was like an all-day event where you could come and learn all these things. Like, you could take a yoga class, you'd get a massage, you would also learn parenting skills. We would talk about nutrition. Of course, now I can't remember all of the different things, but it was really great. It was kind of like I created the event by first thinking about, like, what are all of the various patchwork of things that I put together for myself to be, in this place. And at the time I was like, felt like I was just kicking ass and had really got it together. And so I was kind of reflecting on, like, well, how did I do that? How did I create this? Which is this question I've often encouraged you to ask yourselves. I was asking myself this question: how did I create this? And I came up with this list of, like, all these things. Well, I move my body. I, have been working on my mindset and my emotions. I use the Enneagram. I have worked on my relationship with my body and with food, et cetera, et cetera. So I brought in, like, experts in all those different fields. And so the moms got to have this, like, day where they just kind of, like, went around to stations and got, like, a little dose on all of those departments. And the person I brought in to be the food person she is an intuitive eating nutritionist. And it was fascinating to watch us talk about the idea that your kid knows what they want to eat, and what they want to eat is actually important information that's probably aligned with, like, what their body needs. And Somebody inevitably, whenever I do something like this, inevitably somebody raises their hand, is like, yeah, but if I like put a whole chocolate cake on the counter in my kitchen, my kid would just eat the whole chocolate cake and they wouldn't eat any dinner and they wouldn't eat protein and, et cetera, et cetera. They would just make themselves sick on chocolate cake. And so we had this whole discussion about like, well, maybe. And also, really? Would they? Like, is it really true? Like, how many times have you been to a birthday party and you watch the kids throw out like half their birthday cake slice that they get, or they can't finish their ice cream cone or whatever? Like, kids respond to feelings of satiety way better than adults do because they haven't been programmed yet that this is your only chance to eat. You're not allowed to eat. This is your cheat day. So you better eat this entire piece of ice cream, even if you are full, because tomorrow you're not allowed to have ice cream. Or you better eat this right now because it's dinner time and you have to be a member of the clean plate club. Or you better eat all of this dinner right now because now you have a rule that you're not allowed to eat at past 6 p.m. or whatever. Kids haven't learned all of those external rules yet. So it happens all the times where kids don't finish their food, and not just dinner, also dessert. But even so, let's just say it's true that this kiddo would eat an entire chocolate cake if it was put on the counter. What if there's like infinite chocolate cake? Like every bite, there was a magical chocolate cake, and every time a bite was taken out of it, it just reformed, and the cake was like never got smaller. Would this kid eat chocolate cake forever without ceasing and give up everything else in his life and never, ever, ever get full and never, ever, ever, I mean, get so full that he maybe has to throw up or something like that? No, of course not. There is a mind body connection inside of this child. And even just saying that to these parents, you just watch this like does not compute look on their faces. And probably right now there are people listening to this podcast and feeling the same thing, like, what are you saying? We should just keep giving our kids chocolate cake? And no, of course it's a thought exercise, but the point is, you know, intuitive eating is something that's already what kids do when they are born. They are full. When they're full, they stop eating. When they're hungry, and they don't really care if it's 3 in the morning or, 2 in the afternoon. It's, this is what my body is telling me to do. And they don't really care if it's rude that they're not finishing their food. They don't really care that you spent a long time making their food. They don't care, that they just ate 2 minutes ago and now they're hungry again. Like, none of that is a piece of the puzzle. The only thing that's in the puzzle is what's going on internally for them. And so, learning that it is very it can be a very dysregulating concept. Maybe what I'm saying intellectually, you're like, oh yeah, sure, totally. And then when we start talking about like, okay, so how does that translate into like how you parent around food? That's when the wheels come off and it's like, no, I can't, I really can't do this. I can't keep an infinite chocolate cake on my counter. I can't do it. That's just too far, or whatever. Once again, we have this marriage of like doing our own work so that we can parent the way that we know is going to be the best for our kids. Sometimes that is hard to do if we haven't done our own work. So I encourage you, whatever, like notice the parts of yourself that are getting really activated as I talk about all this stuff. Notice any sort of resistance they might be feeling, any yeah buts that are coming into your mind. Those are all protective parts of yourself that have lots of behaviors and rules and stories and strategies to take care of you and your body around food. And we all have those, and none of those parts are actual self. And when you are eating from self energy, when you are parenting from self energy, when you are able to kind of address and take care of those parts so that they can step aside and let you be in self energy around these topics, everything changes so much. So just for now, my invitation to you is to just notice when you're like, forget that shit, I'm not doing it, or that's crazy talk, or I'm not going to do it, for example. So think about that stuff as we go on, because I'm starting kind of with one of the most charged topics here, which is food. Food is so charged for families. So if you have a picky eater, if you have a kiddo who is like a carbaholic and never wants to touch anything else, if you have a kiddo who like just basically seems like they just never want to eat and they're eating like a bird, Or, by the way, if you have a kiddo who has very specific dietary needs, like for example, your child might have diabetes or allergies, or maybe they have hypoglycemia or any of those kinds of things. Like there's actual needs that your child has around food that require us to be a little bit more interventive than we would if our kids, had carte blanche around food. So, that's all a piece of the puzzle. So when I say like, well, what are the skills that we would learn around food? Let's say that we've done our own work and, really engaged with that stuff when we're all in on that. Now we have this ability to parent however our child needs us to. Well, what are the skills around food? In general, we would say let your child's body lead. The more messaging that your child gets that they're the boss of their body in all of these different ways, the better. So when your kiddo says, hey, I don't like this dinner, great. Thanks for telling me. I had no idea you didn't like broccoli. Good to know. And, you certainly don't have to eat it. Now, every family will have still their structure and rules around food. And this is kind of where that, like, we have to kind of find the marriage between like that sort of like intuitively led way of being in the world and the fact that you do live in the world. So, for example, we don't eat at 3 a.m. That's something that a newborn baby starts to learn, as time goes on. For example, maybe like after dinner in our house, the rule is, the kitchen is closed. That's a rule that some families have. Sometimes parents start to try to put some rules in place because it helps kids lock into a more, circadian rhythm with their food intake and things like that. All of those things are part of the puzzle, right? Like we're not going to just have like a nonstop golden corral in our kitchen, like this buffet, this never-ending buffet where you can just eat anything you want, however much you want, at any time you want, 24/7. That's not how it is to live in the world. We have meals, we have times of day, we have, different kinds of foods for different times of day and stuff like that. So the more, like, as our kids get older, that stuff becomes more and more codified, and that's okay. You're not like traumatizing your child because, you don't serve pancakes at dinner time or because you don't let them get a snack at 2 a.m. These things are all okay. It's the how around about execution that is where those skills come in. So we let our kids be the boss of their body. They choose. A really great mantra around food is it's our job to provide, it's their job to decide. And when they decide, we respect their decision, including they might decide, even though they live in a family where the kitchen's closed at dinner time, not to eat their dinner. That's your choice. You have chosen not to eat dinner. You have chosen not to eat until tomorrow because in our family, we don't eat after dinner time. That's okay. That's your child's decision. So they are in the driver's seat and we don't argue with them. And the worst thing we can do when it comes to food is start to, impose our will in terms of like bargaining, convincing, making rules, punishing around food. We never, ever, ever want to be doing that because now this child isn't making decisions from themselves. So, for example, let me outline a difference for you. So, hopefully, you can see where I'm going with this. Let's say I'm in that family where the kitchen's closed after dinner time. That's just the way it works. This kid already knows that. Like, this is the way our families always work. This is the container you live in. You know, this is the way that your world is structured. Kiddo already knows that. And we're sitting at the dinner table and kiddo says, I don't really think I want to eat dinner. Cajoling, controlling, managing, sort of coercive or punitive approach to that might be like, well, you better eat your dinner because you're certainly not getting anything after dinner. You know the rules. We don't have food after dinner. Eat now or eat tomorrow. Those are your choices, and you can't leave this table until you finished your plate. And I worked really hard at making this food and you're not eating it. And this is what's healthy food. And you ate garbage all day long and now you're not eating this. All of that stuff is no, 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 no. That would be imposing our will and trying to basically usurp our child's body autonomy and agency and self-direction. More like healthy way to look at that is, I don't really want to eat this dinner. And you just say, well, you know your body best, babe. And if you're not hungry and you don't want to eat until tomorrow morning, I totally respect that. So I have subtly reminded my kiddo, like, just remember, if you don't eat now, you're not eating until tomorrow, with respect for my child, with absolute deference to their body, absolute respect for this person as a separate individual for me. The boundary is the same, the container is the same. The energy that is in that container is very different. So, and to be honest, that's a really great illustration of the difference between, consequences and punishments, the difference between a conscious, self-actualized parent and an egoic parent. These differences aren't limited to food. So that's a way for us to start to approach some of these eating things from the very beginning that our child is on this planet. And by the way, me saying you know your body better than anybody else, or you're the boss of your body, or I'm so glad you're listening to your body, or I notice that you're listening to your body, I am constantly giving my messages to this kiddo that they're the boss of their body, that they actually know that what they're hearing from their body is worth listening to, that it actually is real, all of those things. Now, a child who's been raised that way, what are the odds that if someone tries to touch them inappropriately when they're like 13, they're not going to realize that it's not okay, or they are not going to be able to say no or whatever? Does it guarantee any of that stuff? Absolutely not. But a kiddo who's been taught always, always, always that their body is something that they can expect to be respected, that their body is something that they actually know, and the way that they feel in their body is right and correct, that child is 10 times more likely to say no, to communicate when something wrong has happened, to understand that what happened to them wasn't supposed to happen and that it was wrong, like all of those things. So it's crazy how the way you talk to your kid about food when they're 2 years old could be the thing that changes everything for them when they're 16 years old. Isn't that crazy? But it's true. It's body stuff. It's all connected, right? And we can translate this stuff down the road. So let's talk about now, we talk about how we talk about bodies outside of food. Okay, well, I mean, let's always have that message. You're the boss of your body. You know your body better than anybody else. So, what does that mean? Well, maybe we're wrestling and we're tickling and we're playing with kiddos and they say, stop, even if you know that they're laughing and they're actually having a really good time. The second they say stop, we stop. Not because necessarily the game has to be over, but because we want our kids always to have the lived experience that stop is a word that people should be listening to. It has weight. When our kids talk, they deserve to be listened to. And especially when they say stop, what's weird is if someone doesn't listen to it. What's weird is if someone tries to make them finish their dinner when they don't want to. That needs to be weird to our kids. And so we make healthy stuff normal to them. And it's the same thing, just to circle back and keep picking up that thread around food. It's the same thing with teaching our kids healthy eating. We teach that by making it normal. We model healthy eating. We serve healthy food. We have healthy foods available to kids, and we minimize how much, unhealthy stuff is around. And by doing that, not by lecturing, not by shaming them for eating unhealthy foods, not by calling some foods good and some foods bad, or even not by calling some foods healthy and some foods unhealthy, because that is a very subjective, nebulous definition, by the way. Just by modeling, like I can tell you when my daughter was, here's a good example. When she was maybe like very young, 10-ish years old, she started asking at dinner time, like, can I make my own dinner? And this was a great example of me having to do my own work. That was like absolutely not how I imagined food working in our family at all. I had a lot of internalized messages about food from when I was a kid. Dinner, we all eat together. We all eat the same thing. Mom makes this meal. You're welcome. And you don't leave the table until you finished your meal, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And being able to just get past that stuff I was so grateful that she didn't ask me that before I had already been doing my own personal work and a lot of other arenas in my life and in parenting. Because when she did ask me that, I definitely felt that like, oh, I do not want to say yes to this, but I did. And I said, absolutely, you're welcome to eat something different. I'm not going to make something different, but you're welcome to make something different. And she would. And I never said anything about what she could make, what she had to put on her plate. I would just say, basically like you're welcome to make yourself a healthy dinner. Have a great time and eat with us still, but where you can eat what your healthy dinner is. And I never told her, no, you can't put that on your plate or whatever. Let me just tell you, like the very first night that I said yes to this, the dinner that she put on her plate was an egg, carrot sticks. I'm trying to remember if it was carrots or cucumbers, but I'm pretty sure it was carrot sticks, a piece of toast, and strawberries. That's what she decided in her mind was a healthy meal with no, cajoling from me at all. And to this day, Gigi almost always makes her own meals. She doesn't almost ever eat the foods that we are collectively having as a family. And she often will make herself a meal that's even healthier than what I've put together. She learned that because I modeled it for her. It was normalized for her that this is what a meal looks like in general. It seemed normal to her to eat that kind of a thing. And it would seem abnormal to her to sit down and have a bowl of Fruit Loops while we were all having like pork tenderloin and a salad. So we once again we're wanting to give kids the message that overall, number one, you're the boss of your body. Number two, the stuff that your body is telling you is accurate and worth listening to. And number three, that doing those things, your body being respected, your body being wise is normal. Listening to your body, doing what feels right to you, other people honoring the fact that that's what feels right to you, that's all normal. That's what you have the right to expect from yourself and from the world around you. Um, so okay, so we've talked about sort of like body stuff when it comes to wrestling and touch. We've talked about like food stuff. Now let's talk about body image and things like that. And by the way, I really hope that as you're listening to me talk about these things, you're realizing I hope that it is activating parts in you, that there are parts of you that are like, oh my God, I just don't want to deal with this. Or like, I hate everything that Anne's saying. Or yeah, I can see that I need to do this, but it feels a little bit hard. Those parts being activated, I hope that's happening for you because I really hope that what's naturally happening as everyone's listening to this podcast is that we are all seeing, having this lived experience even of, oh yeah, I really do need to do my own work. Doing my own work is a fundamental piece to being able to execute on any of this stuff. There is no way that I could have ever parented this way without doing my own work and continuing to do my own work. So now let's move from all of that stuff to things like body image. So one of the things we know is that we don't want to be, first of all, categorizing people in a subjective way about attractiveness or unattractiveness, pretty, ugly, all of that stuff. We, in fact, kind of, you got to toe the line on this one, but minimizing the amount of commentary we make about other people's appearance or about our own appearance. So we're not blind. If our kid says something like, oh, I'm black, but that person doesn't have the same skin color as I do. That's not something we're going to be like, I don't know what you're talking about. That is a real thing. And also, kids naturally will say something like, well, that person seems fatter than that person. And we have all this meaning and charge around the word fat. And so we're like, we don't want to say that. You know, it is, if it's accurate, it's accurate. And we can acknowledge and validate our child's perceptions without, without colluding with them and agreeing with them necessarily, and with giving them some sensitivity to say, you know what, you're right, that person is fatter than that other person. And just so you know, there are some people in the world who feel a little bit sensitive around the word fat. So we might not use that word just to be respectful of them. But you're correct. And I would love if and there's a huge amazing movement, anybody out there who's like read the book Shriek, or oh my gosh, I just can't even go down that rabbit hole. But there's so many amazing activists out there that are, destigmatizing the word fat and feeling more and more comfortable with using the word fat, and fat people asking to be called fat. That's a whole nother rabbit hole. We won't go down that. But there's a way for us to have neutrality about physical observations and to minimize physical observations with our kids. And when our kids start to talk about their own bodies, the worst thing we can do is invalidate them. So if your kiddo comes to you, and it's going to happen, I mean, it is going to happen. They might not be these exact words, but say something like, "Oh, I look so ugly," or "I look terrible in this clothing," or "I'm so hideous," whatever they say, that will happen. Of course, our knee jerk reaction is going to be like, "How could you say that? You are the most beautiful thing that has ever walked on this planet." And by the way, 99.9, or I would say even 100% of the time that our kids are saying these, judgmental things about their appearance, they're not even true. But it doesn't matter. The whole point is, if we invalidate what our kids are saying, they don't feel that emotional safety with us anymore, and they don't feel understood. So a better way to respond to something like that is to say something like, "I'm so sorry that you think you look that way," or "Oh my gosh, it hurts my heart to know that you're thinking about yourself that way. That's such a terrible feeling to have. I'm so sorry you have it." Um, you know, I'll give you, this is a totally separate example, not about bodies, but just this morning, my 11-year-old was like, "I hate when you have to work. You ignore me all the time." And we had this conversation about how, like most families, both parents leave the house at like 8 in the morning and don't come home until 6 at night, and they don't get to interact with their kids at all. But in our family, I don't work full time, and both my husband and I work from home, and we can interact with our kids throughout the day and all of that stuff. But at the end of that conversation with my son, I said, "But I'm so sorry that you feel like I'm ignoring you all of the time, because that's a terrible feeling. Feeling ignored is awful. It's irrelevant whether it's true or not." It's, of course, I don't ignore my son, but the fact remains that he feels ignored sometimes. And of course, your child is not ugly or hideous, or their outfit does not look disgusting on them. Doesn't matter that that's not true. That's their feeling. And the feeling is important to validate. So we always want to be validating our kids' experiences, and then ask questions. So, "Oh my gosh, I'm so sorry that you think you look terrible in that outfit. That's an awful feeling to have, that you don't like the way you look. What makes you say that?" Or, "What do you think would be pretty?" Or, not because you're going to make it happen or you're fixing a problem for them, but because that gives them a doorway to explore themselves and say, "Well, I guess a lot of people don't even realize that their definition of beauty has to do with size, or that their definition of pretty has to do with what's common or normal or popular or trendy or whatever," especially kids, right? So having that awareness is huge. Imagine a 16-year-old who still has all of their, biases and all of that. All those messages have unfortunately still penetrated into their consciousness, but they also have a consciousness about, "I think that looks pretty, but it might just be because it's what everyone else is wearing." Because I know that's a thing that my brain does sometimes. Like, my God, what an enlightened conversation you could have with a kid like that, right? So having those conversations where we validate the emotion and then get curious with our child so that our child can get curious, that is a really amazing way to look at body image. Now let's talk about consent. So once again, that whole, like, anytime someone says stop or no, we stop and we listen. Huge piece in that puzzle about the consent. And then before your child is ever old enough to have that conversation about consent in that very direct, explicit way, they are implicitly absorbing messages about consent all of the time. Because not only am I telling my child, "You're the boss of your body," I'm also telling them, "I'm the boss of my body. I don't like when you touch me that way. I need to take space from you if you can't respect my body." All of those things that we're giving this message to our kids from day one, that bodies are sacred, that they are your, and that each person is in charge of their own body, that people have the right to say yes or say no about how they interact with their bodies and how they show their bodies and all of those things. Like, these messages are so paramount, because now, let's say my kid is 10, 11, 12, 13, whatever, however old you think it is the appropriate time to have sexual conversations with your kid. We can talk about consent and it completely fits with their worldview. What happens all the time is we have a conversation about consent with let's say an 11 or 12-year-old. You are the one who gets to say yes or no. And if you, sometimes when you're being with somebody, they might want to do something and touch you in a way that you don't like, or you might want to touch them and you need to get their permission, and you have this great conversation. What happens all the time is, like, that conversation is a really great conversation that makes no freaking sense with the way the rest of this child's world works. So let me get this straight. When it comes to sex, I'm the boss of my body, but you're the boss of my body when it comes to what clothes I wear, what food I eat, when I sleep, when I get up, what times of day I can eat, all of those things. Like, how does that make any sense? If you're talking to a child who already from the very beginning of their life has been receiving the messages and so firmly believes, like, I know what's right for me, nobody else does. When I feel a certain way, that's important and worth listening to. I get to decide about all of the things I do with my body. And then I have a conversation with that kiddo about sex that involves also those concepts. They're going to be like, oh, yeah, obviously. And God forbid something happens to that child before we've had a chance to have that consent conversation. Even then, they kind of have that intrinsic feeling of like, this is not right. This is not how the world is supposed to work. So now we've talked about consent. Now let's start talking about sex. And this, I will tell you, was one of the big leviathans for me of putting my money where my mouth was. And thank goodness I had already been engaged in my own self-growth work for so long. And I had already put into practice these principles in these maybe like lower stakes, less stressful things like dinner time and tickling and stuff like that. So that when my 14-year-old at the time came to me and said that he was going to have sex with his girlfriend, I was able, well, the truth is I totally overreacted and did all the wrong things. But I will say that within the same day, I realized that I was being a complete hypocrite and totally did a 180 and have really done a great job ever since then with this stuff. But whoo, that was it. He uncovered in like one moment all of the parts of me that had not had work done with them yet, and I had some unfinished business there, which is just the way of children, to reveal your unfinished business, right? Sex is actually none of our business. Oh my gosh, can you believe that I just said that? That's so frustrating. But my husband and I thought we actually already were on board with like applying these concepts to sex. Like, we had always talked to our kids about sex in this like very body positive, sex positive way. We talk to them about masturbation in a positive way, like whatever's happening in your body, that's normal. There's nothing wrong with it. You're not bad, or any of that stuff. In fact, we had done such a good job about it that when we had a conversation with one of our kids about masturbation, where we said, like, we just want to make sure that there's nothing bad or wrong about doing that, he kind of looked at us like, why would I think that? And I was like, oh, right. I don't have to dispel this myth because you never absorbed this myth, which is great. Yay, pat on the back for me. So, and we had always told our kids, sex is something that, when your head, your heart, and your body are ready, you might want to have sex and it feels good, which is something no one ever told me. No one, when I learned about sex, told me that it felt good. It was always like when a man and a woman really love each other and they might want to show each other how much they love each other. So it was sort of an evolved conversation I got, because it wasn't like then they get married and blah, 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 and they want to make a baby and this is what they do to do that. It was beyond that. It was like they want to have sex. It's a way that you celebrate your love. You show each other that you love each other, and this is what sex is. Nobody ever said, like, you want to do it because it feels good. No one told me about orgasms. So we thought we were doing such a great job of like your head, your heart, and your body all have to be ready. And when they are, sex can be this beautiful, magical thing. We told them that it feels good, that it's natural for it to feel good. We helped them understand like the connection between masturbation and having sex. They obviously knew all of the ins and outs of what sex is. What I was not really understanding when I was talking to my like 8, 9, 10-year old, where sex was just a thing that might happen someday, was that I wasn't the one who got to decide when his head, heart, and body were ready. So when I lost my mind about him having sex, he once again gave me that look of like, I don't get it. Why are you freaking out right now? And I realized, well, two things. Number one, he was right. And number two, like I wasn't nearly as healed and healthy around sex as I thought I was. And, he literally, I mean, God love him. And thank goodness we had done all of this other parenting with him. So he already had these ideas like, I'm the boss of my body. I'm my head, my heart, and my body are ready. He had absolutely no qualms about expressing all of that stuff to me because what we were doing, my response didn't make any sense to him because he had already formed a worldview that was about sex positivity, body positivity, comfort with his body, autonomy and consent within himself, a connection to and awareness of his body. So I'd done all of that stuff. So of course he was going to have this reaction of like, what is the big deal? Like, what are you freaking out about? And so he said to me, I really just don't understand why you're so upset. You told me my head, my heart, my body. Well, I'm telling you, my head, my heart, and my body are ready. And so I'm going to do it. And I was literally just like speechless. And then I was like, yep, you're right. And it doesn't matter that he maybe was right or he was wrong. It's his decision to make, and it's his thing that he got to be right or wrong about. And I, at this point, have had 3 children go through this so far, and some of them were right and some of them were wrong when they made their decision. But that's none of my business. And you can't have a conversation with your kids that is like, your head, your heart, and your body aren't ready, which, by the way, that is what I tried to do. I was like, here, let me prove to you that all the sensations you're feeling inside of yourself are wrong. After I've just spent 14 years teaching you that all the sensations inside of yourself are not wrong. Like, that doesn't make any sense. And I realized that, it was kind of in for a penny, in for a pound. I had to, go the distance with my kids and not just give up this whole approach to parenting and to bodies and sexuality once it got hard for me. So hopefully you can see the through line here with all of this stuff, right? When I first said the big two things, doing my own work, doing our own work as parents, and learning those skills and actually bringing them to bear in our parenting. So it's like this inner game and outer game stuff. So hopefully you could see those two through lines throughout the whole thing. And then you can also hopefully see the whole through line that's present here about our kids being in charge of their bodies and us doing as little or I would say as much as we can to disrupt their mind body connection as little as possible. So that's kind of in a nutshell the way that we approach all of these things. Now, there's so many nuances. What about clothing? What about when kids maybe want to dress provocatively? Or what about when something happens to them that isn't okay? How do you support them in maintaining that sense of inner awareness and helping them with that? Or all of those little vicissitudes that happen when we're not the only influence on our kids. Like, just because I've never told Gigi any of the messed up stuff that my parents told me or talked about in front of me doesn't mean she hasn't heard it before. Of course, people talk about how ugly fat people are in front of my daughter. And of course, people talk about what's sexy and what's not in front of my daughter. Absolutely. And you better believe that crap does enter her mind and it does affect her. So there's nuances, there's challenges, and always, 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 we are like, parenthood holds your feet to the fire and says basically, like, put your money where your mouth is. If this is your philosophy, it has to be your philosophy even when it feels really squirrely, not just when it's like, oh, sure, you get to decide bananas or grapes with your lunch. it's hard. It is hard. And that's why that inner work is super important. And this is what I do with my kids. And this is what I do with my clients. I help them with that inner work and teach them the skills and behaviors that bring intention to their parenting, whether it's about food and bodies and sex or any other topic in parenting, and if we can do those two things, well, first of all, that's what I have tried to do for myself. And it has been a labor of love. It's hard, but I will say that now I have teenagers. I can see that it's working, that I can see that it's coming to fruition in my kids, and watching them navigate their lives like so much better than I did when I was their age, with consciousness and this strong sense of self. It is so worth it. That labor of love is worth every freaking sweat, every moment of sweat and tears and everything. So if you are feeling ready for that kind of investment of your time and energy, and doing that kind of inner work and learning all of those skills, and then getting to see that payoff and that experiencing that incredible deep reward of those like healthy, healed, whole kids, that's what I do. So set up a free discovery call with me, like I mentioned in the beginning of today's podcast, and bring it to me. Try to stump me. That would be great. Or just, bring me your quagmire, bring me your mess. It's my job to take your mess and make it neat and orderly and make sense. So I hope that lands with you. I hope this was a good episode for you. I think it's a little bit longer than usual, although I can't see the exact time right now, but it's just my sense. And I can't wait to talk to you guys again next week. Bye, everybody.
The episode is over, but there's more waiting for you. You can grab my free workbook, Getting Kids to Listen the First Time, that walks you through the fundamental principles I teach all of my clients and applies them to this very universal parenting challenge. So if you're sick of repeating yourself all day long or just want to learn more about my style, you'll definitely want to go to bit.ly/kidswholisten. And if you're ready to work with me, let's meet. Set up a free call at bit.ly/Kaplan call, and let's create an action plan that gets you exactly where you want to go. And of course, links to all this goodness are in the show notes. Thanks for joining, and I'll see you next time.